Now, building analytical applications, I've been doing that for many, many years. And you can get very detailed in all the elements that make it up, or you can try and look at it from a flow perspective in terms of where do we start and where we ultimately want to end. Okay. Now, if I look at it from a business perspective or from a user's point of view, ultimately all you need is for me to give you something that allows you to do the things you need to do, whether it's analyze things or report on things or do both, or to distribute information to the rest of the organization on particular topics, whether it is to provide regulatory reporting or whether it is to do financial P&Ls and balance sheets and do consolidations. Whatever that requirement is, that's ultimately what we're trying to drive towards, isn't it? The question then is, okay, where do we start? And what are the things we need to think about? So if you look at the slide, it talks about over here the kind of things we would do when we build an application. So the kind of stuff we do is we would go and find the data. There's no sense me wanting to provide you with a solution if I don't have the data in the first place. Make sense? Yeah? And then I've got to figure out what do I have to do to that data. Because the problem is, invariably the data that you give me may not be complete. It may not be correct. Okay? And it may actually require me to integrate multiple sets of data. Good example is you may give me your sales data. But every transaction is in different currency. And by the way, your group expects you to report in dollars. Okay, well, okay, how does that happen? Of course, just taking your data is not going to get me there. So I now need to think about how do I deal with the currency conversion that needs to happen to convert all of that to dollars. And then the question starts happening around, well, do I do it at source? Do I do an average rate? What kind of rate process am I going to use to derive that information? And then, of course, you've got to think about how do I enrich the data? What stuff do I need over and above what you give me to provide the overall solution? Yeah? Now you say to me, I want to be able to do loss ratio analysis. Well, that's a simple requirement in its own right, isn't it? Not particularly complicated. But to get to that number is not that simple. It requires lots of integration, lots of data, lots of business rules. But of course, we need to make sure that we understand the spectrum of the data that drive that requirement. So here we talk about things like this. Have we got the data? Are we able to synchronize the data? What data do we need to add? Do we cater for all the time series analysis? You may want to look at this stuff over time. You're giving me a bunch of sales records that gives me an instance of a sale, but you're not interested in looking at it like that. You want to be able to do it by quarter, by year, by month, potentially by weekday if you actually have quite a lot of seasonal processing going on in sales. So there's a lot of things that you may want to see from a time point of view. And you may want to look at particular products from a current month, from a year to date, from a life to date perspective to see which products are growing and which ones are shrinking. This stuff all makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, from a business point of view, it's obvious. Technically, it's not that obvious. Because obviously, when you look at it from a technical point of view, you've got to figure out how you make the data live up to that. And that's obviously where we do all of this transformation and enrichment process. Then we move on into making sure that not only have we got the source data, we also produce the output in a place and a format that supports what you're trying to do with the application. And one of my pet hates is people that drive the application from the output. And the reason why I hate it is because it doesn't think about future use. It tries to provide point solutions. And as a customer, that really doesn't help you. So what we try and do is actually make sure that the output directs itself to the solution you're looking for, but not limit you to what you're looking at. Because I think that is not really helpful for businesses over time. And of course, making sure we understand the business rules that drive the end result. When we talk about earnings and insurance, well, what does that mean? In your world, what actually does that mean? If you're producing a P&L statement, well, I can see your TV. There's gazillions of postcodes in here. How does that translate into a consolidated P&L? Okay, what are the rules that drive that? And how do I ensure that the data you're giving me is valuable and correct? What are the rules that I need to consider? Now, we spoke earlier on about the ability to have a claim before a policy starts, And one of the ladies said, well, actually, that's possible in my world. That's interesting, and I don't argue that. But it may not be possible in everybody's world. So it is, again, understanding the fact that for a given customer, those rules may not be the same. And then, of course, once you've done all of this data and business rules, you've got to think about how you then package the process. Because it's not just about having the right source, having the right data, having the right rules. Then you've got to think about process. What actually is the process we need to go through here to ensure that the application at the end is giving you the right information? So take a simple example. Part of the process here would be, I've got all my claims data, but somewhere along the line, I want to introduce a grouping of policyholders' age. Because actually the way I want to analyze it is not by individuals or the individual's age. I want to bucket these things into collections of age groups, because when I look at the loss ratios, I'm really interested in multiple groups of policyholders. But that is important that I plug that into the right level of the process, so that when you then run the system, you not only get all the data and the correct output, but you also have all this intelligence added to the data at the right time, so that you actually get the value of the information we supply. So we see that whole idea of defining the process and then automating it. Because what you don't want to do is somebody sitting there every day pressing buttons. This whole idea of the MI only happens if somebody's there is not a good place to be. Yeah? This thing should just happen. It should just do what it's supposed to do. And when it doesn't, it should tell you that, hey, can't do this today. There's a problem here. And it should give you half an idea of what the problem is too. Not like Microsoft. It has failed. I'm now going to reboot your system. Doesn't really help sometimes. And then, of course, you've got to build the output. Make sure that whatever you've now packaged as source and process and logic now gets delivered in the context of an output. But it's understanding that output from a multitude of perspectives. Because what you look at is on the one hand, you want the pretty things, the dashboards. We all like those things because they make us look good. And we want those. But we also got to think about, well, what do we need that's static and highly focused and highly formatted, regulatory type stuff, statutory type stuff. That really is important. But we want the system to do those for us. We don't want to have to sit there every month getting panicky about getting those things out. But at the same time, we want a tool that allows us to, apart from the output, do this ad hoc stuff, that we can actually analyze the data in an ad hoc fashion. Yeah? And then you want to be able to figure out who's going to use the system, what they should see, what they should be able to do. Build some menuing process so that people actually see things in an environment they recognize. And at the same time, document the application so that when the guy who built it disappears, you have an idea of what you've got. And as it changes over time, that it actually keeps them in the documentation in sync. And then there's the usual stuff of training users, doing some end user acceptance testing, make sure the user's happy with what they've got and they can do what they need to do and they can see the stuff they need to see and they can do the analysis that they need to do. And then you're on that relationship path of, tomorrow there's something else you need to do. And the day after there's some new data that you need to add on some new business logic that needs to be incorporated. That's all part of the process. But that obviously is part of that relationship building process. But what you want to make sure of is that your application is built in a way that it's extendable. So take one very simple practical issue in terms of the rollout. I've got a one-liner there about migrating the application to live. Now that sounds really simple. How many people here have migrated systems from development to QA to training to live? Okay, it's simple, isn't it? Takes about 5 minutes. Is that right? No? Okay, why not? Because I tell you why not. Because the world doesn't think that way. The world expects you to figure out all the stuff that needs to change to go from one environment to another. And it's dreadful. And you waste a huge amount of time and you introduce more errors in the process. And suddenly you go back and test the migration. So that's part of what I mean when I say that we need to be able to package things in a way that naturally flows from one environment to another. And hopefully I'll show you some of the things that I mean by this. So that's my slide. That's the pitch. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do some stuff. Okay, Now, let me qualify up front. It may go wrong. And I'll tell you why, because I'm actually running a development version here. And whilst I have all the trust in the world that it's going to work, it may not. But when that does happen, I'll smile and move on, and you won't even notice it. Okay. So what you're looking at here is this product called App Studio. So our product is fundamentally made up of two halves. There is this thing called App Studio, which handles the back end. It handles all the application work in terms of getting the data, transforming the data, adding intelligence to the data, making sure that we deliver the data in the context that we need, making sure that the data is actually automated and packaged, all this good stuff that needs to happen. Yeah? And if you actually look on the left-hand side, you can see this thing kind of follows the logic of what I've just described from an application building perspective. So if you look at that left-hand side there, you can see the first thing it does, it says, well, where are you going to source your data from? So remember what we spoke about when we talked about the application, is figuring out where your data sources are. Then you start looking at, well, what information do I need from that source? You know, it'll all be nice if all our sources are the same and they're all exactly laid out correctly and they all use the right names and they all have the right data types. All of this stuff would be fantastic if that actually happens, but it isn't the case. And we all know that. So how do I deal with those things and what data do I actually need? Well, this part deals with that. Now, what transformation do I need to do to that data? There may be data in there that I don't need. There may be data in there that I need to add that doesn't exist. Now, that's either through asking somebody to capture it or by actually adding logic to derive that data. And then transforming the data, outputting the data. What format do I need the data in? Do I just output the data as a data set in Excel for somebody? Do I create a database with all the data in a warehouse so people can report from that? Do you already have a warehouse and I'm actually using your warehouse and my database to combine data for reporting? Am I building cubes? Am I providing input to Power BI? You know, a number of questions. Of course, what we're doing here is making sure we have all the tools that we need to do that. And then you go from adding some intelligence to a cube if you built one, and doing analysis on the data, transferring data, verifying data, packaging the process. Remember we talked about the process? How do we package that process? So there's some tools here that allow us to package the process and then document the application. Again, there's some components in here that actually allow us to package and document the application. So what you have here is kind of a single platform that allows us to build an application. So let's look at an example. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to show you some data. Let's look at a set of data here. So I'm going to go onto my C drive, and there somewhere I have EiB Analytics, EiB Conference, and I've got some data. You see a couple of files there. I've got a file, a workbook, which just contains some dates. You can see over here. All this is literally a single column that contains a pile of dates. And not very meaningful in its own right, but you'll see why I have that. I also have a file in here which allows me to look at sales by currency. So what I've got here is an actual detailed set of data that somebody's given me, and they want to be able to do sales analysis by customer and product over time. And what they've given me is the breakdown of the sales. So I can see here that I start off with an order. I have an order date, I have quantity, I've got customer details, I've got unit price details, shipping costs, etc. So I have all the information that relates to that particular sale. Okay, and then but I'm also looking for data over and above what's here, because actually what I'm going to do is I want to be able to analyze the data by. So let's go and have a look at it in a bit more detail. I also want to look at products by category, right? Because if I look at my individual products, I want to be able to subcategorize and categorize those products at higher levels, so that I can actually not just analyze the products as individual line items, but I can look at them collectively. So what I've actually done is allowed a user to define what this is, and I'm going to superimpose it on the data that they supplied me with, so they can do actual analysis by category rather than the individual line items in the sales order. Make sense? Yeah. And then if I move that one step further, I've also got data in here that relates to the customer. But I'm actually quite interested in the customer in terms of that customer's location, i.e. where is that customer that I'm selling to. So what I have here is I actually have a set of additional data which again was supplied by a third party, which tells me who the customer is and what the postcode is. Now this is all made up, so don't pay much attention to it, but it's an interesting requirement in terms of being able to then profile the customer and where I'm actually selling more or less. But that data doesn't exist in the source sales data that I'm getting from the customer. So I want to be able to augment the data by incorporating this. Yeah, all make sense?
Sorry.
That's all right. All right. So how would I now bring all this data together so that I can do the analysis on that data? So what you'll see here is that I'm now using App Studio, and I build what is known as a design. So if I go to the EIB conference, I have this thing in here which effectively allows me to build a design. What is this allowing me to do? It's effectively saying is, oh, I've got some data in this spreadsheet. What spreadsheet is that? I'm bringing data in from the spreadsheet, which is sales data by currency. We just looked at it, didn't we? So I'm now able to go to Excel and say, give me my sales data. And I can actually view it. I can go here and say, show it to me. And the system will go, yep, there it is. That's what your data looks like. So it's actually gone off to the spreadsheet, loaded the data, and it's now showing me what it thinks I've got. So I'm here looking at the actual data that is currently present in that spreadsheet. So I can see all the product sales details that's in my system. Right? The next thing I've done is I've actually, in SQL Server, I've got a table. Somebody's actually populated a table in SQL Server that gives me all my product categories. Yeah. So if I look in here, what it's doing is actually connecting to SQL Server. It's pulling out my list of products, and in there it's telling me what the category and the subcategory is. Okay, so what we're seeing here is I'm actually using two totally different ways of getting to my data. I'm going to Excel to get the sales data. I'm going off to SQL Server to get the product data and the product category data. That's a totally separate source. And then I'm going to a CSV file because, again, that CSV file was supplied by a third party, and that contains the customer location data. And there I actually have the customer name and the locations. You can see here I'm starting to pull data from all kinds of places. Now, whether that is CSV or Excel or SQL or ODBC sources or the web for that matter, I've got all kinds of ways of pulling data in so that I can start putting all the data together in a way that you can do the analysis. Does it make sense? Yeah. And so what you see here is I'm also going to here, and what I'm doing here is I'm actually going off to the web, and I'm pulling in the exchange rates so that I can actually do the conversion from the data that you've got to a common USD format. Okay, so you can see here I'm using 4 totally different sources of data, and if I look over here you can see what I have is I've actually got a set of rates that I can now apply, and that's actually my machine going off to the internet and getting the data off some website on the internet as I'm standing here.
As at one date.
That is a given rate. I can decide whether I go for a given rate. I can do it on the per transaction level and get the rate at that day. Well, there's a number of ways we could implement that. Yeah, and now what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I've got all the data now that I need. So if you think about the sales analysis you want to perform, whether you're looking at just the sales or whether you're looking at the sales by category or by product category, we've got all the data we need to supply that particular data. Now, what I'm doing is I've got to look at how do I combine the data. So in this example here, I'm effectively saying is go and take the sales data and add the product category data to it. So you see here, I'm effectively saying take all the data from the sales side and add the subcategory and category information to it. And link the two sets of data based on the product code. So the product name is the one that I'm using to link the data. So I can now see if I view the data here. Now that's quite interesting, and I quite like that about App Studio, is that you can literally visualize what you get as you go. So you can see here now, I'm actually seeing the result after gluing the data together. So if I go right across to the other side, you see I suddenly have the subcategory and the category information now part of the data that I'm looking at, even though it came from a totally different place. Yeah? And then I go one step further and I say, right, well, I need to add some calculations here, because what I'm missing is I need to add a key to link the sales data to my customer data. Because the thing that you may not have spotted is if you look at the customer location file, it had one field with a name in it, and it was Joe surname. However, in my sales data, it's got two columns. It's got a forename and a surname. So the two are actually not compatible. So what I'm doing in the system here, I'm saying is, okay, I know that's not going to work. What I'll do is I'll just add another column and I'll concatenate the first name and the last name. When I then combine the two files, it'll magically work, because it now is comparing the same stuff. So you can see here, I can now go to the next level. Now I'm pulling in the customer location data. You can see here, I'm saying is get me the postcode and match it based on this new field called customer key that I've just added. I don't need that field later on, but for the purpose of linking the two, I need that field to be able to make them compatible. So I can now simply add that, and equally now, if I go and view the result at that point, I should now be able to, for each customer, identify the actual postcode associated with that customer. Okay. And you can see there, I've got the postcode against each record now. Now, the one thing I was going to show you, which is really sad, and I can't, but it's just the way it is I was going to use the Web API. So one of the things that I can do with the products, I can use this thing called the Web API and an JSON connector. And what it effectively does, it allows me to use these web services that are out there to actually get additional data. So what I can do in this instance is I can give it the postcode, and it'll give me all kinds of information about that postcode. It can tell me what constituent it is in, tells me what region it is in. It gives me about 40 different additional bits of information about that one postcode. And all of that information is now available, and I can pick what I want from that and use it. Yeah? Including, for example, the latitude and the longitude. Because if you're going to use a mapping tool to, for example, map the customers that have bought from you, using a postcode is not good. Proper mapping tools needs a lat and a long to be able to do it properly. Otherwise, you can't vector it, the data. Now, this thing will go away and get me all the lats and longs for every postcode. So when I then use Power BI maps, I actually get a very accurate representation of who bought from me where. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I can't run that here. For some reason, being on this network, it doesn't allow us to go out and get that kind of data. But believe me, that is possible. So we can actually just, using that postcode, we can add all kinds of data in here that we can use for further analysis. And any web API that conforms to the standard JSON interface we can use. And you know, I have found about 9,500 of these. It's amazing what you can find out on the internet today. Some of the things.
You get things like weather information or climate analysis.
Yeah.
Like that.
I mean, one example was that you can use the postcode, and you can get accident information on a radius from that point. So you can say, give me all accident information and a 5-mile radius of this postcode, and it'll actually give you back statistics on what accidents occurred in that particular environment or that particular location. So there's all kinds of really interesting stuff we can do with this in terms of pulling information into the system. And then last but not least, I was putting in the currency information. So you can see here what I'm doing is I'm telling the system to now go and pick up the rate and link it based on the currency. So again, if I view the data at this point, I should now have both the location information plus the rate associated with each of the transactions that I now have in the system. So you'll see when this puppy comes back over here, I have a rate. And I can now add a calculation, and the calculation will take my base sale, and based on the rate will give me a comment, because all those rates convert to US dollars. So I can now create a new calculation called USD sales, and I'm now simply using that rate to convert all the sales figures. Of course, I can do that with all kinds of other stuff like the costs and etc. But I'm just using the sales part for the moment to illustrate the point. Yeah. Or does this make sense? Do you see the reason and the benefit of doing this stuff? Yeah, makes sense. What's nice about it that it's all visual. The thing I love about this tool is that any one of our consultants can develop for a customer, and I don't care if I've never been there. I don't care if I have not seen this thing before. I can take any piece of logic, look at it, and I'll tell you what it's doing. And that's quite amazing, especially when you think about the longevity of applications that you have. You want to build it in a way that you can transcend the people, because the moment the knowledge is only in one person's head, it becomes very hard to support your applications over time. And that's something that this gives us. And not only am I able to interactively build, but I'm also able to support this quite efficiently. Okay. And the other thing that this does for us, which is really helpful, is it allows us to add new features to the product at any time. So every one of these connectors, as you see them here, these little squares, do something. But what is nice about the product is I can make it do more things at any time. I can actually add more boxes in at any time if I think there's a real need for it. And it doesn't take us a long time to do that. So for example, we have the whole GDPR thing. So we thought, hang on, one of the things we should do is allow people to encrypt data that's sensitive. So why don't we have our own GDPR connector? So all we did was we created the brand new one. And if I type in here, let's see if it comes up, GDP. Hello. Oh, it's not that. I don't need Cortana. I need to spell properly. There we go. So, if at that point I can just add a new connector, and then I can go up here and go to this connector, it's going to flow the data through the design and pop it in there and say, okay, what do you want to do now? And I'm going to say, well, I want to encrypt the postcode because, I shouldn't really show that to anybody. And I'm going to give it a passphrase which will control how you decrypt it. So if you want to decrypt the data, unless you know what I've just typed in, forget, that doesn't happen. Okay? But the nice thing is I can then view it. And you should see, if I look at the output of that, it should dynamically go away, pull out the postcode and dynamically encrypt it and block that from view. So if you look in the output that comes back, in here somewhere I should now have a bunch of X's that says, nah, you don't have access to that data anymore. And that will stay that way until such time as I decide to either delete that data or decrypt it. And if I want to decrypt it, I have to give it the passphrase, otherwise it doesn't get decrypted. So we can either permanently lock data and you can't see it, or we can at the right time inject a decryption process. And if it's, for example, transferring data from one site to another, we can just keep it encrypted all the way through and then decrypt it on the other side. So there's all kinds of ways we can implement this technology. But you can see here's a good example of where we saw a need for a particular bit of logic, and all we had to do was plug in a new connector, and that just goes into the flow, and you can apply it wherever it's relevant. And then I can just delete that if I don't need it. Make sense? And then I'm simply saying to the system, now take all this data that I've nicely put together and create me a database. How many of you create databases? Users. Now forget about the technical people. Users. How many users create databases? That's one. A real database, I'm talking SQL Server databases, not little Access things. Yeah? Nobody? No. You see, real people don't. Let's be honest, real people don't. You just want the thing to be there because that's all you need. You want this thing to have your data and be able to access this thing. So why do you need to understand how to create this thing? We don't. So let this thing work it out for itself. That's all that does. You don't have to tell it anything other than where does database need to go. That's what you need to tell it. It'll figure out the rest for itself. Okay. And then I'll shush and I'll just run it. So I'm going to just run this thing. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually saying to the system, now go and collect all that data, apply all this logic, then build me a database, and when you're done, go and build me a cube as well. How many people build cubes? Oh, there's a couple here. Yes! I've got Fred. Not many others. So how many of you know how to build cubes? No? You sure? Not been on a queue building course yet? You don't know what you're missing. However, real people don't. So again, why the hell do you need to understand that technology if all you want is the value from it? That's what we do. We figure out how to build the stuff on your behalf. We apply all kinds of logic that makes it work, but we don't expect you to tell us how to do it. But there are people, we've got one over here and one over there, that do know their stuff. So what they want to be able to do is fiddle with it, because they know how to. But you don't care. As long as the stuff comes out the other end in the way that is useful, you don't care, do you? And you shouldn't. Yeah? So what we're going to do is just press this button. And it's going to burble away. And you'll see it burble away. Eventually, hopefully. Hello? Oh, actually, I'm on. Maybe I didn't. Let me try again. Oh, there we go. Right, there you go. So you see it burbling away? So what it's doing, it's actually based on all these little lines, it's figuring out what the sequencing is. And it says, okay, what can I do next? What do I need to do before I can do the next bit? And so all this inherent logic is in there about what is the flow and what sequence does it need to do things in. And it'll figure it all out for itself. And then when it's done, it'll build me a database. And when that's done, it'll build me a cube. And then it'll pop up a little dialog and say, I'm done. Thank God. There we go. It worked. That's great, isn't it? Think about what we've just done. We've taken data from all kinds of places. We've gone off to the web and sucked data off the web. And we've done conversions. We've integrated stuff without really understanding a lot about it. Is that true? Now, do I expect every end user to sit here and build this stuff themselves? No, I don't. But if you are technically minded and you want to build applications quickly, can you see how you could accelerate the development using this? People, technical people, do you agree? Yep, good. Right, so what I've now done is I've brought all this data together and I've built this stuff. So now, let's move on. Now, you can say to me, but Nico, how do you package this? Well, actually, you know what? Packaging is an interesting concept, but I won't spend too much time on that, because what you really want to know from me is how do I interact as a customer with this data now? You've just put all the stuff in there. How would I use it? So let's look at it from a consumption point of view. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go into the system, and I'm going to do a couple of things. Right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build a pivot table. How many people build pivot tables? Yes, we do those things. Right, let's build one of those. So I'm going to build one of those. Yeah, I'm going to go to Insert, Pivot Table, and I'm going to use one of the connections. I've got a connection to this thing. There it is. No, it's not that thing. Have I got one here that's linked to my conference? Do you see it anywhere? There it is. Don't know where it puts these things, but okay. There we go. So what I've got, you can see the data. Do you recognize that? We saw in that sales data set when we brought it in, we could see that we had things like the rate and the shipping, and we've got currency, and we've got the customers, and we've got some products. You remember all of that stuff? So that's all here. I can now interact directly from my pivot table. I can now get to this data. So let's just do some stuff. Let's go and get some sales. So I'm going to look at, let's find sales. I want to see sales, and I want to do analysis by customer segment. So I'm going to drag customer segment into the filter. So now I can pick a customer segment, and I want to analyze this over time. So let's go and find the year and put years in the columns. So that's cool, but makes sense? Yeah, that's standard pivot table stuff, nothing complicated here. But maybe what I can do is I can actually then, because I remember I said we have two halves of the product. There's App Studio that does the back end stuff, and there's a Report Studio that does the front end stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and actually build a report in our product. And I'm going to go connect to the cube in here somewhere. I should have built something called EIB, where is it? EIB Conference, good guess, sales. And it's allowing me to analyze. Now I can decide, you see it all looks very much similar to the other stuff, isn't it? Nothing really different here. I can analyze by segment. I can look at customer, so I can look at things over time. So let's say I want to look at it by years in the rows, and I want to bring out customer segment I've got up there, and let's put product. In this case, I'm going to go to, where's the product breakdown? Sorry, I've got product here. I want to do product category over there. So now what I'm looking at here is I've got a breakdown of sales by year and product category. So I'm not looking at that data totally differently, but this is looking at the cube. Remember, I built this fancy cube thing. Now I can look at the data there. It's all aggregated and dynamically calculates all this wonderful stuff for me at any level, whether it's the daily, the month level, the daily level, the yearly level, all that's dynamically calculated. And then just to make life interesting, I'm actually going to go back here, and I'm going to go and I'm going to add a SQL report as well. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually going back to the underlying database now. Remember, we built this database, this thing we don't care about, but it's got the individual sales orders in the database. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go to that database, and I'm going to go and find the sales data. So now I'm saying is show me the individual transactions, and I'm going to want to be able to see, so say for example I'm looking at the, in terms of that, let's look at something interesting. So let's look at the individual transactions and look at sales. We don't need the row order, and we want the customer, we want to see the total sales by postcode, and I want to break that down into the various customer segments as well. So in here somewhere, can somebody spot the customer segment? Where am I? Fourth from the top, right over there. Thank you very much. Now, so I've got 3 different reports. Yeah, you see that? That's a lovely Excel pivot table, which we all understand and love. That's a cube report built in our technology that allows you to look at the data from any angle possible. That is a transactional report where we can actually pull out individual sales transactions for a given set of criteria, and we can group them and total them and do all kinds of interesting things with them. But what is more interesting for me is the fact that I can then go into this report, and not that one, I meant that one, and I can click on this thing called page and link, and I can link that to the sales report, and I can link that to the, no, not that one, try that one, and I can link that to the pivot table. So that if I now go into here and I say give me all corporate customers, what it should do is it should dynamically synchronize all the data. Did it do all of them?
No, didn't use SQL.
Damn, right, close, but no cigar. Let's just check this one and make sure that that was set up. Which one was it? That was a SQL one, wasn't it? Let me go in here and make sure that that is synchronized. That wasn't linked. Okay, so I've got to link that on this one, and I've got to link that to that one. Yep, that's cool. So now if I change the segment here to home office, is it doing it? No. Damn, didn't work. It was working earlier, but it's Sod's law says it's not going to work when you demo it. Hey, there it goes. It does actually work now. It's synchronized all 3 of them. See, what it's done is actually across 3 totally different sources of data. That's an Excel pivot table all in memory. That's a cube sitting on analysis services. That's a SQL table or view sitting in a database. It's actually figured out how to synchronize all of those. So from your point of view, you could look at that and go, actually, that's quite cool, because that means that I don't have to care about where the data sits. I can get to all of that, and I can combine that data in one spreadsheet, and I can build some amazing reports and dashboards without having to worry about whether all the data is in the right place, in the right format, to the right level of aggregation. No need for any of that. Is that cool? Yeah, I think it's cool. Not because I built it, I really do think it's cool. Of course, then, if you think of it from the user's point of view, you also got to think about the packaging part of this. So what we would typically do in an application is to use our gallery. Now we have a a gallery in the product, and the gallery is akin to Windows Explorer, if you want to call it that. Yeah? So if you look in here, I can go in here and say I want to go to the gallery, and it opens up this thing that has folders in it. Yeah? And if you look in the folders, you will see it contains workbooks. Now what's nice about this thing is the fact that I can create any number of folders that I need for a given application. I can put all the relevant content, and it doesn't have to be just spreadsheets. I can put anything in there, whether that is a Word document, a PowerPoint, a zip file, my source data. You can put anything you like in there. It doesn't care. Right? But what is really useful about that is you can then apply security on every folder. And you can decide who can access what in terms of its content. So it's really helpful because it then allows you to make sure that you only expose the data and the information that's relevant to the user to them, rather than just everything thrown in one place. Under the covers, the geek in me is not excited about that. The geek in me is excited about the fact that this thing actually is a SQL database. Under the covers, there's actually a SQL database that holds all of that information, and it's all compressed, and it's all encrypted, and it's all very fast over the network. I'm going to have to stop. I'm getting really excited here. But you back up one database, and you have every single workbook that exists in your organization. If you put them all here, and you back up one database, you have a backup of every single workbook you have. Now that is cool. That's value as far as I'm concerned. And that's what the gallery gives us. But if you think about the menuing, what I can then do is I can actually go into my app here and build a little menu. We actually use Excel, surprisingly or not. And we just have a standard template. You know, there are a number of templates. I'm actually building a new one at the moment, but this one is good for the purpose of what we're trying to show. And what it allows me to do is to actually put on as many icons as I want the users to see. I can have different groups of users. I can have sub-menus. So I can actually build the content. And what I can then do is, if I want to provide access to a particular report, I then simply use one of the links in the menu. So I can go here, for example, click on that link, okay, and then go in and say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the system, I'm going to insert the gallery link. And what that really means is you can now connect this to anything in the gallery. So I'm going in here and saying, I want to go and actually find that report that I just built. And I want that report to dynamically load from that location. I might want to make that pretty by changing the text, format it more prettily, all that kind of stuff. But the point is, if the user then clicks on that link, what will happen is the system will dynamically go away and load the report and refresh it, make sure the data is current. Okay? So the benefit you get is that suddenly you have an application that is packaged. Yeah? You talk about automating all of this. We have our own scheduling system. That means that we can actually schedule all this process to run whenever is relevant, either every night at 9 o'clock, or if it's a case of somebody dumps a file into a folder, we can say run every 10 minutes and check the folder to see if there's a new file or not. All kinds of variations that's available in terms of how we package that. Okay. Did that make sense? Okay. It's a very difficult topic to do in 40 minutes. Because I could carry on for 3 hours. But I think you might throw me out the door if I did. But hopefully what I've done is given you a flavor of A, what the product is capable of, but B, also the level of sophistication that's built into the platform and the kind of speed we can get by using the platform. Because the thing that we find is that we can also take what we've done and reuse it really, really efficiently. And if I had time, I would have shown you. I actually went on the concept of, okay, take that information and build the app, which I've done today. But I've only built that in a fairly simplistic way. What I also did was I went and said, okay, what if I actually want to give you something where you can give this thing any data, and you tell it what data you're interested in within that data set, and it will actually build the application automatically. Now the product is sophisticated enough that it can actually do that. And I've actually got a real life example of where that happens. But I'm not going to show you that today.